welcome everybody. We got like 27 people joining in already. My image has gone away, but I'm Dash McIntyre. I'm going to see if I can get the image back. I don't know why it disappeared, but I can be a voice either way. Um, so I'm Dash McIntyre with the Halfway Cafe. I've got Adrian Polk here. Say hi, Adrian.
Hey
And
everybody.
we're gonna have a little discussion about politics. We used to do this podcast quite a bit, but we haven't done it in a while. But now Substack seems like a really good opportunity to do this with its live videos. So here we go. We're gonna have a little discussion about politics. And feel free to leave comments. We'll try to maybe interact with some comments if you've got any feedback or any ideas to add to the discussion. I'm still very new to this, so we'll figure out how that works, seeing the comments and whatnot. But first subject, how do you think the Ukraine war is going? Any thoughts on where we're at? Is it a bit of a stalemate? Is Ukraine making headway? Russia seems a little bogged down. How do you make these negotiations between Trump, Zelensky, and Putin?
I'd say it's very much a stalemate. There's not a lot of movement going on the ground. I kind of wish it would be over by now. Trump said he'd end the war in a day. That hasn't happened. It's been a couple months now.
Yeah,
Um,
ended in a day, and then he said it was what do you say? It was ironic. He was being funny or something.
yeah, I'd say it's unfortunate because I think Putin is just trying to see if he can, at this point, get JD Vance and Trump to just pull back all support completely. And that would be really bad for Ukraine, obviously. I don't know what else the goal would be, right? He can't conquer more land very quickly. It's taken a lot of Russian soldiers, a lot of battle deaths, and broken equipment, helicopters shot down, planes shot down, tanks being destroyed. They don't even have a lot of cars. They're using like motorcycles and stuff now. So I don't know what the end goal is, except maybe hoping that if he waits Trump out, Trump will just give up and not, completely stop supporting Ukraine. But I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. It just seems like a little bit of like late stage, like a czarist kind of delusions of grandeur. Putin wants to add territory. A lot of the land seems kind of like it's just useless now. Like you've kind of got
There's a million mines on
retro.
it.
Yeah, Million Mines, you've got this like retro, like no man's land in between Ukraine and Russia now, where apparently Ukraine has. I've read some reports, I'm not too educated on it, but it seems like Ukraine is really dominating the drone space, and that Russia is still losing like 7 soldiers for every 1 soldier that Ukraine loses. And the moment it's really hard for Russia because they're on the offensive, so they're trying to steal land, so they're the ones that have to get out of their trenches. And then
Hmm.
from what I've read a few reports of the battlefield, and it's like they kind of just instantly get spotted by drones, and then you get those like suicide drones that just run right at them. And it seems like the pace of the war is really slowed down. Russia's maybe getting like inches here, meters there, or something with their meat waves. But I mean, it seems like this is definitely a diplomacy kind of end to the war. But what do you think about Trump now that he's kind of saying that he's just going to like walk away and he's kind of losing interest in the negotiations? He's been kind of blaming Zelensky, while Putin, meanwhile, he's not really accepting any like, planks to the treaty. He's not agreeing to a armistice or a ceasefire. What do you think about Trump? Is he just trying to wash his hands now that he realizes the Ukraine peace is not as easy as he claimed it was?
I mean, maybe. I guess that's kind of what it seems like on the face of it. If you would think if he really wants the war to end, he would just keep providing arms and supplies and money to Ukraine. Keeping it going doesn't help him. He wants it to end. A lot of people talk about how Trump genuinely doesn't, understand war or why people continue wars or he's
Or
really
fight in them and
anti-war.
volunteer?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So like you would think that, in a utilitarian sense, if he gets the biggest utility by saying he can end the war, why threaten pulling back support from Ukraine when in reality that's just going to incentivize Putin to try to just see if he can wait him out? Because, one of the main things keeping Ukraine in the fight is continual flows of weapons from us directly or indirectly through Europe or, them buying American weapons with the money we're loaning them. So, keeping it doesn't seem to be what he wants. It's not what he publicly says. So, yeah, it's kind of strange. He says he wants the war to end, but he's doing something that might prolong it more. So, I don't know. It kind of
Yeah.
conflicts.
Do you have any thoughts on how drone war is shaping up, like the successful tactics that the Ukrainians are using? Is that something that every country should just be buying, like, and building, like, tens of thousands of drones to prepare for whatever the next war they're going to have?
Well, it's certainly a cost curve thing. So a lot of exquisite systems that a lot of militaries have, they don't have a lot of them, and they're really expensive. And if you can knock out a bunch of stuff like high-end tanks or armored personnel carriers with a couple drones, it costs a couple $1,000s if that. It's a pretty game changer. I wouldn't want to be on a front line while hundreds of
Yeah,
drones
right.
fly over you with grenades, and that kind of sucks for both sides. There's been a lot of interesting things where between jamming and then using wires to control drones. So like I've seen some pictures where like trees have like just look like weird like tinsel Christmas trees because there's so many wires from the drones because both sides are experimenting with jamming and capabilities of getting drones to the other side without being shot down. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I recently wrote a big article, and this is an article we kind of wrote together. You definitely helped a lot, but it's reasons to still care about Ukraine. And I posted this a couple times. I just keep editing it, and now it's actually like 2,300 words, so gets pretty long. So anybody who read that, I appreciate that. Thanks for reading 2,300 words. But looking over it, it just seems like in terms of geopolitics, like if we're going to play a risk game, kind of adding Ukraine to the European Union, to NATO, having this giant bulwark of like 37 million people we're plucking from the traditional Soviet Russian sphere of influence and making them a much more Western leaning country that wants to have trade with Europe, that wants to integrate their military with the US. And now for most respects, they kind of really are integrated, right? Like they're getting a lot of old NATO material, they're getting into American logistics and supply chains. A lot of the funding that America did to Ukraine was basically buying new ammunition and arms systems for America's military and then shipping Ukraine like our old, not obsolete, but like kind of dated materials. So, what do you think about that? Do you think this is something that hopefully like some advisors and maybe Republican senators in Congress can convince Trump that Ukraine is in America's national security interest to be more allied with us? Is this something that, future presidents, if Trump doesn't agree to this, future presidents should definitely get back onto the swing of helping Ukraine and whatever that looks like 4 years from now, like if a Democrat wins in 2028?
Yeah, I'd say you know, you have the tactical, the operational, and the strategic. I think most politicians in most countries struggle with like the strategic way of looking at the world. Historically, America and the presidents we've had in their foreign policies have been kind of tripped up because we do have a lot of national interests, things that are good for America. And one of the things I think that a lot of other countries don't realize, or even people in this country, is that like one of first and foremost, America's like biggest interest as a very open economy that trades with the rest of the world. It's just generally good if other countries aren't at war. Like people talk about the military-industrial complex, but it's not like really in America's interest for other countries to be at war. That's why every president for the last 80 years has cared so much about stability. It's why we have such a involved State Department with other countries of the world. We want other countries to thrive. We want their people to succeed. We want their economies to grow. We want them to produce, you know, goods and services, but then also raw materials that can go around the world. And like the American standard of living and increasing it over time, it's kind of international interest. So I'd say first and foremost, Ukraine's important just because we don't want a global power like Russia invading another country. It's not good to allow the precedent to be broke that countries are allowed to invade each other.
Right.
So that's one of the big things. And then obviously Ukraine's a country where most of the people like America. They like Americans. They're supportive of us. They want closer integration with Europe and the European Union, which is a good thing. Like, I think if you look at the last 80 years, like the European Union is in America's interest, like a strong European Union with countries that are aligned on a lot of issues and work together and don't fight.
Right.
Also, they're not trying to create a sphere of influence in the Middle East or North Africa or the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. They're not, trying to get involved in all kinds of issues that they have no business being in. They're not trying to fund or support proxies in other countries. So I'd say, all things considered, just having a country like Russia, stop a war would be in our national interest. One, having Ukraine, be a democratic country with 40 million people. It would be good for the global economy. It would be good for the resources to be traded. It would be good for them to be more involved with Europe, and they like us. So having another country with
Yeah.
40 million people with arguably the strongest military in Europe,
Yeah, right.
unfortunately battle tested. But having 40 million people join the European Union and participate in the global economic trading system that we helped create, which was, for 80 years has been in America's national interest, is, all these things considered our international interest. Very long winded, but that's my
Yeah, I
answer.
mean, I think when I was re-editing that long piece about Ukraine, reasons to still support Ukraine, one of the newer reasons I came up with was actually that, on top of everything that you just mentioned, like integrating with NATO, having 37 million more people coming into the European bloc. A big thing is like just in terms of dictators, like how many times do we have to read the or watch the same movie? Right? Like dictators that have these delusions of stealing more territory, and in Putin's case, of like adding himself to the list of czars that like expanded Russia, right?
Hmm.
Certainly, it would be good for the Russian people if Putin loses this war, right? Like a lot of his political capital now is this kind of like face-saving effort where like 1,500 Russians a day are still being killed or crippled. In terms of like the demographics of Russia that are so bad already, he's just wasting all these young men. That Russia has a really bad birth rate. They have high shit life syndrome, a lot of alcoholism and drug use, a lot of like deadbeat dads, and just general kind of malaise, right? Like a GDP per capita is lower than Portugal, so here they are trying to be a superpower, and their GDP per capita is kind of like embarrassingly low. But in terms of Putin not having that political viability of winning the war, like maybe that would be good. Like maybe this is just trying to, maybe this is hoping too much. But it would be nice if the Russian people, when Putin like loses this war, the soldiers come back and report like how terrible it was. These meat waves where like the entire military just seems to not give a single fuck about any Russian life whatsoever. But maybe there's a revolution, and then like going forward, I had this idea like what are the odds that like Russian culture is so based in Moscow and Leningrad and St. Petersburg, like these really big cities, right? Like a lot of
Leningrad,
the not let yeah, well, that's an
St.
outdated
Petersburg.
term. Yeah,
Yeah.
St. Petersburg. So like Russia is so expansive, right? You look at Siberia, the Far East, the Caucasus region. There's a lot of like breakaway republics that have kind of long been oppressed, but like, do you think the chances are higher than zero that maybe even Russia could have some like big revolution where the kind of like shit upon peoples break free, have independence, throw out their Russian stooge governments? Even like could China steal land and all? Like if shit hits the fan in Russia and suddenly the political power seems to not really exist in a lot of places, especially because the military has been so extended in Ukraine, and there's really not that many troops, like home guard troops. But like, could even like Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Japan, and China start having like border disputes and take advantage?
Well, I hope not.
I mean, that would like it would be pretty wild, but I don't know.
That would
There's
be wild.
again, it's kind of playing like the risk, like
Hmm.
could Georgia, Moldova, and other places that are kind of like actively being screwed over by Russia with Russian influence and meddling, could they, like have some kind of Ukrainian style revolution where they throw out the pro-Russian government officials that they have?
I mean, maybe. I mean, I don't think it's. I think it's highly unlikely that Japan will take land from Russia. Like, obviously, Russia still has nuclear weapons, so I think they're obviously very concerned about their territorial integrity. That was one of the things,
Right.
like
And the
when
U.S.
you.
should be concerned about that, right? I mean,
Oh,
if
absolutely.
if
Why
like
wouldn't we be?
Russia
Yeah.
all of a sudden disintegrated, and now like there's these like random peoples that have, I guess, ostensible control over the territory where these nuke bases are, like that's a big issue.
Yeah, I will say though, I don't think like most countries will. I don't know. It, any country trying to make a sphere of influence, whether it's like if it were Japan taking land from Russia, or certainly China taking going into Siberia. I know that there's some like big lakes in eastern Russia where China, if they were to take it, would be able to solve a lot of their water problems. But I think I think generally, like that's the kind of thing that's obviously not in America's interest anyway, and that's something we would probably try to like not motivate countries to do. I think anytime there's a sphere of influence or borders being violated or countries trying to take things from each other, I think that's just bad. Obviously for global peace, but it's also not in America's interest because then you're having countries dominate different resources that used to be on the global market, or trying to divert them. So instead of going to the global market, maybe the CCP just takes them over. I don't think that's very likely with like some of the smaller republics in Russia, or the old, I guess, some of the small areas where like very big ethnic groups live and are kind of controlled by a Russian elite. Because I think, as they saw in the 90s, right, like in Chechnya and north of Georgia, where the Russian military came pretty hard and just started leveling whole city blocks, just like in Syria, just like they did in Ukraine. So I think the problem is when you have a government that's willing to do that to their own people or to a potential breakaway region, you're just not going to see that happen, most likely.
Yeah, I mean, very valid points. You want to move on to Israel? Israel is kind of a kind of a rough area.
Yeah.
It's interesting because there was a plan apparently. I don't know how official this was, but somebody was reporting that the Trump administration was looking into sending Gazans into Libya, which seems like a really seems like a half-brained idea. Just
They can
sending
live next door to the random people we're deporting there.
yeah, right. But like Libya, this like civil war stricken country, we're just gonna move them. So I don't know. It's extremely complicated. Like I feel like it is not that controversial to say that Israel is like. I mean, how do you argue that this isn't kind of ethnic cleansing or genocide in a way, if culturally, if not literally? I guess people will get in the weeds and say it's like xenophobic and anti-Semitic to say that Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself. But I think like any regular person can see that Israel has gone a little too far and
Well,
bombed
yeah,
way too
I
many
think that's like
people, killed too many people.
yeah, I think that's a
Yeah, go
point that a
ahead.
lot of people miss, is that while obviously Israel has the right to self-defense, to defend their people, defend their borders, defend their country, defend their way of life, etc., I think it's hard to argue at the same time that Israel may have jumped a little over what most countries would say are suitable rules of engagement with an
Right.
enemy. And I think it's no different than what we have done in our past 80 years and stuff. Taking things too far. But at the end of the day, that's also the point of why Hamas did it. They wanted this reaction to happen. So,
Yeah, I mean, Hamas kind of got what they wanted. I mean, that is always kind of their goal is to like, it's the same thing like the well, sorry, not Saudi Arabia, but the Saudi terrorists on 9/11, they kind of goaded us into an extreme overreaction that we ended up wasting you could argue a ton of money, a lot of years of, funding and like just attention that could have gone to domestic politics, but we, did two simultaneous forever wars because of that. But long term, it seems like Israel has really cemented itself as a pariah status. I mean, go to any college right now. I mean, all of these Gen Z kids that are really up in arms about the pretty wide destruction and kind of slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. Will Israel be able to come back from this easily? I mean, now they're kind of like nominally getting these like normalized relations with the Sunni Gulf states, but I mean, the rest of the world is kind of really not on Israel's side, it seems. What do you think for Israel going forward?
um, I mean, it's one of those things that, like, I feel like the political system in Israel could change drastically if Netanyahu is voted out in a future election. You can obviously imagine a situation where a different prime minister, different leadership, different political elites and stuff steering the country in a different direction. I think, given this point, it's kind of hard to imagine what that would look like. You're right that they are normalizing relations with various countries, and I think that's a good thing. But I mean, I don't know. It'll be like a black mark a little bit. I think, I don't think a lot of people around the world are going to forget about what's happening right now in Gaza, and they're probably not going to forget about it in 10 years. And
Yeah. Well,
it'll be a
especially if they move
complicated,
them all
yeah,
to Libya. If they move
yeah,
everybody to Libya or, work out some deal with Egypt. I know Egypt really is against taking any refugees, really, just because of the Hamas and Iranian influence that is very much against the kind of Sunni dominated states around them. Um, but what do you think about Israel kind of burning bridges with like the Democratic Party in America? Like forever, Israel was kind of bipartisan and not trying to be partisan because they were so dependent on American influence and military support. And, don't we give them like $30 billion a year or something in aid, despite the fact that they're
probably not
pretty,
30, but it's, yeah, I don't think it's like as high as 30, but it's probably a couple. And then we probably give them all kinds of military support. I think,
right.
you know, I think there's one of those things that, like, I don't know if Israel's necessarily burning bridges with the entire Democratic Party. There are certainly Democrats who are saying negative things and trying to stand up for, the plight of Palestinians. But I think a lot of times, like, just because a lot of voters in the Democratic Party, certainly on college campuses, like, look like they represent something bigger or a bigger movement or, popular sentiment, doesn't mean it's necessarily true. You see that on the right as well, where sometimes it seems like a lot of people in the grassroots care about an issue, but then the members of Congress obviously don't. So I imagine that in Congress, most people who have power are not going to turn their back on Israel. They're still going to support Israel. The idea that a Jewish state deserves to survive and prosper in the Middle East is something I don't think most people in power in Congress or our government in general are going to be against or fight against or change. So I think public sentiment though is important. I mean, America isn't the whole world, but we have 340 million people, and our foreign policy is extremely dynamic and a big force in the world. So, I think that's one of the things I think is a lot of people in other countries, political leaders, don't think about a whole lot how much, you see it with the Republican Party in Ukraine, right? Like, whether or not different leaders in Ukraine, like obviously Zelensky, could have navigated something a little better, knowing their audience, knowing the political elite of the political party in power or the political party who may get in power. And I think sometimes it's short-sighted, like thinking like, oh, we'll just bet on this thing, or I don't know. That's kind of a long-winded response, but I don't know if that answers your question.
No, a little bit. I fact check it real quick. We give Israel 3 billion a year, but we've given
Yeah.
15 billion since like the what is it? Their little terrorist attack. Um,
Oh, since October
yeah,
7th or
October
whatever,
7th was it? Yeah.
2023.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you have a read on Netanyahu? I mean, it's hard to
No.
disentangle everything that's going on right now from the fact that just I think Israel has a more right wing government and is trending more right wing than I think many Americans thought, certainly probably many Democrats. And at this point, there's also the thing where Netanyahu is kind of keeping himself out of prison. So some Israeli critics are speculating that he's keeping the war going because if the war ends, he kind of doesn't have these like a military reason to stay in office despite his personal legal issues. And certainly his unpopularity across maybe a lot of Israel. Although we'll see, the governments that they've been electing and creating with their parliament system has been getting more and more right. And then
Yeah.
Netanyahu's doubling down on like kind of extremist politics, the more, fundamentalist kind of religious approach to Judaism.
Yeah, I'll say it's complicated because I think, and this goes back to my popular sentiment kind of remark earlier, like people in Israel, Israeli society is changing over time. Like I remember reading how throughout the 70s and 80s, like a lot of people in Israel, apparently by polls, genuinely thought that, having some kind of peaceful agreement with Palestine was, maybe not possible in the moment, but like in the long term, probably most likely. But I think now, after October 7th and everything that's happened since in the last couple of years, I think a lot of Israeli public opinion is kind of against that idea that there will be a peaceful solution in the long run. That I think the problem has become so much worse the last 2 years. It's like even more of a challenging problem than it ever was before. So I think people who probably thought, oh, we'll figure something out in the long run, I think some of those opinions and attitudes are kind of hardening, either against the Palestinians and vice versa. So I think it's just made the problem way worse. The other thing is, it's funny, like the idea of moving the Palestinian people is so silly. Like there's so many places on this the planet where people harbor resentments against a neighboring people for like 800 years. You go to places in like Eastern Europe and they still remember, oh, like in the 1200s our kingdom, our municipality was this big, but then those people over there stole it from us, and that's still something they think about or talk about. So I think that's a problem with these kinds of issues, is history takes forever to be, it never gets forgotten. They'll be in, if the Palestinians move or get forced to go somewhere else, they'll still have their house keys and always remember the houses that were stolen from them or were destroyed.
Right.
And, they'll put it on the mantle for their whole family, 3 generations later, to remember like, oh yeah, this is when we lost our land and, our property, and it was taken from us. So I don't think that'll, you know, the idea that you could create some kind of like, utopian place in the the Middle East where Gazans used to live. Like, I don't know why that wouldn't be a pretty enduring terrorist target for a long period of time. So I think it's kind of
Yeah,
silly.
that's for
It's
sure.
it's a silly idea.
Yeah. Taking a more macro view, do you think it is I mean, aside from the like gross human rights violations, do you think, like, say, it's hard to say how this will, like, how the plinko will like bounce around and where it'll end up, but would it be ultimately good for America if Israel gets relatively stable with like its issues, and then relatively normalized with the Sunni states as a kind of combined bulwark against Iran? Like, now we've got the nuclear deal coming forward again as in terms of like the military and geopolitics of it, Israel has been extremely successful, right? Like, they took some land on those heights in Syria, taking advantage of the collapse of the Assad regime. They've really smashed Hezbollah and Hamas, so Iran kind of doesn't have anywhere near its military capacity to screw with Israel and American interests. And then, even with the Iranian kind of missile attack on Israel, it was obviously a big political moment when Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states were helping defend Israel from some of those missile attacks. That's kind of interesting. But is it good for America if we can get Israel normalized, and maybe we can stop paying so much attention to the Middle East if there's kind of a natural bulwark against, I guess, Iranian terrorism, and especially if Iran even gets a little more stable, if the Iran nuclear deal finally um, like takes away their nuclear ambitions, they have some compromise where they just get nuclear power. Like, it sounds like a lot of the stuff they're working on is basically just Obama's plan that Trump tore up in his first term. What do you see going on with Iran?
Well, to your first question, I think countries normalizing relationships with Israel is a good thing. I think that goes back to my earlier comment that pretty much no matter what happens, like in general, countries making nice with each other, not having conflict is a good for the planet, but it's also good for America. It's in our national interest. We don't want to be intervening all these places. A lot of people forget that when bad things happen, America's often the only country that can do something about it. So it kind of
Right.
does. If anything's going to happen in the world, it kind of falls on us, or at least to be, either funded or, supported by us. In terms of Iran, yeah, I mean, that's it's a game of it's a weird game, right? The Middle East is an extremely complicated place. There's a lot of dictatorships running the place. They're not democratic free societies the way we would want or hope, or that some of the people in those countries would like and hope. But sometimes geopolitics is a game of risk where you can't control the what the environment kind of is, and a lot of our efforts to drastically intervene didn't really work the way we wanted. Certainly you can say that in the 50s and 60s and 70s during the Cold War, a lot of those plans didn't really work. Iraq and Afghanistan were challenging problems that we obviously didn't get the outcomes we were hoping when we went in. So
Right.
I don't know what your specific question about Iran was, other than like,
Well, I
is
mean, do
it
you think do you think they're coming to the table finally in good faith just because their proxies all around the Middle East have just been so utterly smashed by Israel? And then the idea of the Sunni states kind of normalizing relations with Israel, and then having Israel's military capacity and, of course, nuclear umbrella kind of helping protect them against Iranian. Iran's just such a bigger country, like 80 million people or something like that. Like, relatively secular. I mean, I think that's like another issue,
not their
like kind of what
leadership?
we're yeah, that's what we were talking about with Putin. Like, I mean, there's a
Hmm.
chance the Ayatollahs kind of collapse, and Iran has some kind of revolution. I mean, obviously the uh, the not the crowds when they protest. Yeah, the protests are getting wider and wider, and having more aspects of just regular society getting involved with the women and the scarves and the hair and all of that. I don't know. That would be interesting. It just sucks that there's all these places that just have kind of bad governments, and America is frankly getting into that a little bit, where like our freedoms are kind of being curtailed, and an oppressive government is trying to take away our rights a little systematically right now.
Well, we're lucky. We have a lot of institutions, and we do have a separation of powers. And as much as both political parties would want, the judicial system usually strikes down laws. The legislature doesn't really do a whole lot. Usually,
Right.
presidents don't have the powers that they wish. I think every president has probably thought, "Oh, these executive orders are nice. I can finally do something I want to do."
Yeah.
And
Right.
we do have a series of checks and balances that do keep things in check. People. I always like try to point this out to people, like, for all of America's flaws and political faults, we do have arguably one of the most democratic systems in the entire planet, because you need super majorities on every little branch of
Right.
government to do anything.
And there's so
And
many
then,
veto points that other
yeah,
countries don't have.
yeah, and then we have stuff the federal government can't do legally, and they have things that the federal government by tradition doesn't do. Obviously, presidents flirt around with, expanding that or decreasing it depending, but we have state and local governments where those same checks and balances often apply as well, with state, Supreme Courts and stuff. So in that way, we're lucky. Other countries are not so lucky. Iran has a government that took power in a revolution, and it's kind of set up how those leaders wanted. You have weird institutions that are being run by really old people who have very fundamentalist ideologies. You've got situations where there's a lot of patronage and corruption, so they don't have a free market, obviously. Large parts of their economy is probably controlled by like organizations like the IRGC, or IR, what is it, the Revolutionary Guard or whatever.
Right.
So and that's something we don't see in America, but in a lot of countries around the world, like the military runs businesses. A lot of admirals and generals in the United States military aren't running side businesses and focused on making
They're not
money.
running concrete companies and missile
Yeah,
companies and stuff. Yeah.
exactly. And so, like, it's easy sometimes to be like, oh, if this happened in this other country, or the people rise up or revolt, it's like, that's sometimes wishful thinking. I think as Americans, we often have over ideologically positive ideas that, like, oh, if a revolution, they'll make a functioning democracy with checks and balances, like our like our
Yeah.
revolution,
They'll have
in the
founding
17th.
fathers that really put ambition aside for the good
Yeah.
of the country. Right.
Well, and you see it like globally right now. Like, how many, even in democratic countries, how many political leaders just, just keep running in elections, and they become,
Yeah.
slightly less fair, or, and, I don't know. There's not a lot of George Washingtons of
Yeah,
today,
that's true.
people saying, I've done 8 years and I never wanted it. It's like the Roman idea of Cincinnatus, right? Like being asked to
Right.
run a country, not wanting to do it, and then doing it for a small period of time, and then saying,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to be doing this. I don't want power, and I want to go back to my farm or whatever it
Right.
is. So
Yeah. Let's speaking of that, let's an example of terrible governance. Let's talk about Donald Trump's plane, which apparently today was just accepted by the military. Do you think it is good that a country, Qatar, the size of Connecticut, should give the U.S. president a plane worth 1,000 times his presidential salary? Right?
yeah, well,
Is that good? you know,
yeah, call me old fashioned, but I don't think we should. I don't think political
right.
leaders should be taking those kinds
Should
of
Saudi Arabia
contributions.
give him like this like stretch limo Hummer, just like worth like $100 million or something like that? Should every country just bribe him with something?
Yeah,
And it's funny
the
he
answer
did
is no.
mention, yeah, yeah, rhetorically, of course. It's interesting. Imagine the self dealing that we're going to find out about this, though. At a certain point, like now that he's actually a billionaire because of all of his constant scamming and grifting and scheming and like the crypto stuff, like the rug pulling, where he's taking all of these like fees for everybody moving around money in his crypto is and like multiple crypto coins because Melania has one, he had one, he had a stock, so he might actually be a real billionaire now. But like, what drives him? What is the sociopathic behavior? Do you think that now that he's finally actually a billionaire, he still needs to like make some deal with these small countries and get himself a private plane he gets to take home with him after he leaves office, if ever,
Well,
if he
I'll just
leaves?
say in a general sense, like, I think if you're running, I don't think people with their hands on the power should be doing stuff like that. Like, and I think it's a long-term culture of uh, patronage and corruption that's been kind of growing for a long period of time. Like, people call Washington D.C. the swamp. There's a little bit of truth to that. It's not as swampy as some people think or say. It's not as bad. This country,
Right.
we're lucky. We have a lot of nonprofits that do a lot of good work. But even some nonprofits, some of their CEOs make hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, which makes you question whether or not they're really contributing to the societal good that their nonprofit exists to serve. And you see it like anywhere, like, we had a senator have literal gold bars. That's fucked up.
Yeah. Right.
You know, he was actually, punished, and will probably, face him. One thing I hate is just, people who are roughly in the orbit of Trump, are setting up consulting agencies, making 150 grand from foreign countries every month. And it's like, that's just on the face of it wrong. So
Yeah,
No
right.
bueno. That's my stance. No bueno.
Yeah, no bueno.
Well, and it's really just it's an overall cultural problem, right? I think a lot of people don't take the public interest very seriously. People get into political power sometimes, and it's like the ring of Gyges in Greek mythology, right? Like you get this ring, you can do whatever you want, turn invisible. So what does human nature do? They take advantage of it, and I think that that's a type of institutional um, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but just the idea that once you have the power to do something that enriches you or gives you more power, people are just going to do it. And without the institutional checks and balances or like the shame culture we used to have, like
Right.
in previous eras in American politics, people would you know resign in disgrace over small amounts of bribes, and now yeah, I don't
Trump
know.
getting 1,000 times his presidential salary from one country. Uh,
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about domestic politics for a little bit. I've been struck by kind of like somebody recently called it weaponized incompetence. Like when you look at a lot of these people who have been appointed to the cabinet. So we have RFK Jr. getting asked about cuts to various research and medical programs in these like hearings in the Senate, and then he'll just claim he didn't know about the cuts. And so it's like, well, okay, well then you're not prepared. Like, why are we having this hearing if you don't know what's going on in your own agency, right? Christy Nome said the same thing. Like her ignorance about habeas corpus, where she was saying it's like it's a right that presidents have and to take away, and it's like no, that's incorrect. Like Pete Hegseth obviously is like spending more time seemingly focused on his makeup and like matching American flag socks and ties rather than like running the maybe biggest organization in the entire world, like with the most money and most international logistics. Cash Patel and Dan Bongino, like clearly are the wrong people to run a giant FBI, bureaucracy. Um, do you think? Do you think this is intentional in terms of like dismantling the government, or is it just Trump being lazy, not wanting to spend any time interviewing people and finding good candidates and just picking people he watched on TV? Like, is it a combination of both? I kind of tend to think it's really just he's being lazy and like, he just anybody who will say nice things to him and about him in public and in the interviews, he's just going to say, "Yeah, you're the guy. You look the part." Central casting, Pete Hegseth, Fox News weekend host, have at like the world's literally the world's most important institution in the entire history of humanity, maybe like the U.S. military, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty funny.
Like
I mean,
you were in the
I mean,
Navy. How do you
the
feel about that?
the Republican Party, I feel like, has flirted with that a little bit of just not understanding. I mean, if you read Michael Lewis's book, and he's going around podcasts right now talking about a new book he's written, and just how few people really understand what government agencies do. And like, I think there's an idea that like a federal worker is just someone who just kind of sits around an office all day doing nothing, collecting a paycheck. It's like
Right.
the federal government literally is not just paying people to sit around and collect paychecks. Like, you know, in the 2012 primaries for the Republican Party, they were all talking about who was going to cut the Department of Energy faster. And it's like, hey, newsflash, the Department of Energy handles nuclear weapons. You can't just
Yeah.
cut that. You can't just fire them
Yeah.
all. And it's like the
Yeah.
Department of
Nuclear
Energy,
subs
yeah.
are dependent on that.
And I mean, like, I don't know what's the other hypothesis they have about the Department of Energy other than it's just the agency that keeps them from drilling for oil everywhere. Which if like anyone listening, I recommend you like Google org chart of the United States government and how many agencies there are. There's just so many agencies. There's bureaus. There's independent organizations within the federal government. We have all these weird structures from like the 1910s and 1920s, the progressive era, and how they set up different government organizations. There's like some organizations that can make money, they don't profit, but they, have all kinds of deals with like industry as regulators and stuff. And it's a really interesting thing. So it's really complicated. I think even people who work in the federal government, work in a individual agency, may not even know everything their agency does. There might be like sub agencies and subgroups of people. Obviously, in any organization, if you work in a big building, like, ask yourself, do you really know what the people down the hall to the left do? Like,
Right.
it's like, so people not really understanding what the federal government does, and then, picking people to run these things. Some organizations are very complicated. There's like little things like where like, isn't it? It's like the Department of Commerce, like a shockingly large percentage of people who work for the Department of Commerce do weather stuff, and it's like, well, you think it's commerce? They're doing stuff with money, but it's like most of the people are working for NOAA and doing what meteorological
Right.
bathymetry data for on the ocean coast and stuff, and not everything's as simple as just, oh, Department of Energy, yay or nay on drilling for oil.
Right. Yeah. Drill, baby, drill.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, St. Louis just had some big tornadoes, did a lot of damage. There's a lot of issues with FEMA not showing up at some of these natural disasters. Kentucky also had some tornadoes. Um, like moving forward to maybe 2026 and 2028, are you bullish or bearish on Trump basically just kind of wrecking America, like the economy with tariffs? And like screwing over so many people that all of these agencies and like social security and medicare getting these cuts and losing officials that can no longer have very substantial or thoughtful customer service. Do you think there is a chance that democrats really might mop up starting in 2026 just because trump is just dismantling things and has no appreciation for how the government works and doesn't know anything, and these people he has appointed are just more intrigued and focus on like the Fox News coverage rather than actually the day-to-day human and bureaucratic operations of their jobs?
I don't know. What was the first part of that question? That's kind of a long
Just
question.
yeah, it's kind of ranting, I guess. But just take it anywhere. Like, what do you think? How do you think 2026 and 2028 will shape up? Do you think some of this destruction might actually catch up with Trump? Will Republicans be held on the Republicans in Congress be held accountable for these Medicare cuts and this budget if they can pass it, which I imagine is going to be terrible and add to the debt and just cut all this stuff while giving tax cuts to the rich?
Yeah, I mean, hmm. I have no idea what's going to happen in
Is it too
2026. I
early?
think the Democratic
Just
Party
too
has a pretty
early?
low approval rating right now. It depends
Well,
on,
what do you think about their strategy? I mean, are they doing a good thing by just kind of being quiet while Republicans just seemingly step on endless rakes? Are Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries meeting the moment, or are they being smart by just letting Republicans kind of self-destruct publicly? Like, would Democrats ruin it by just start politicizing everything and making it a us versus them thing instead of right now, like some Trump people are just kind of floundering?
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think to a large extent, like, a lot of the country's still humming along kind of normally, right? Like they're doing some silly things. They're doing some things that would not be advised if anyone
Yeah, but with the
knows those
tariffs, like
organizations. But
right, but the tariffs, it's like, next quarter, like, can shit hit the fan? Right now, the ports are largely empty. There's not really many ships loading up with the, traditional goods from China. When we start getting into the summer, like, will any stores have Halloween stuff? Will we start noticing then? I mean, that
I
that
mean, we'll
that's like how.
see. Some of the stuff, it's like it's hard to say, right? So they put tariffs on a country and then they lower them. So there's like a seesaw. It's gonna, change how many goods come in. But as tariffs maintain, I think there's an interesting thing where it's like, will we see arbitrage between different countries? Like how many companies are just going to say, okay, we're going to ship something to Canada and then we're going to truck it in from Washington State, through California to LA. So I mean, long term or I should even say like
Make
the medium
Canadian ports
term.
great again?
Yeah, oh, I mean, that's kind of what arbitrage is. It's like, hey, we can, America's a big economy with 340 million people. They put 10% or 28. I think it's like what all told 28% tariff on China right now. So like, if you sold products and shipped it to Canada, you could make a pretty penny, importing it
Right.
from Canada. And it's like, if that happens, I think there'll be an equilibrium. Consumers will obviously pay more because that's kind of how tariffs work. That's just econ 101. You start taxing stuff, the price goes up. It is interesting that some people are talking about whether or not different suppliers of products are going to eat the tariffs, which is kind of funny.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, we'll see. There's obviously uncertainty. One of the weird things is like, some people have been talking for 13 years about how a bubble is going to form, the stock market's going to crash, but we do a pretty good job of always being afraid of economic calamity. So, the animal spirits of the economy might change where, companies that were spending too much money on stock buybacks and stupid stuff that didn't really help the economy and probably could have contributed to a bubble. Maybe that bubble won't pop anymore. So that'll be a positive thing that could have happened otherwise. Crypto going down is a good thing. Crypto going up
Yeah.
is a whatever thing. Some people are losing their money. I don't know. I mean, it's really weird. Like, I don't want to say like I don't want to be like Alan Greenspan saying in 2006 that America's figured out the economy and we'll never have a recession again. But I will say
Yeah.
that Americans are afraid of everything, and so we have these weird equilibriums where when everyone's constantly afraid the economy is going to crash, it makes it less likely the economy is going to crash because people
Right.
are holding on to their money, they're not spending, they're not taking out loans, businesses are, and then you throw in the tariffs, and you're like, well, we're obviously not going to have a bubble now. So if we're already
You're right.
afraid the economy is going to crash, and we've eliminated the possibility of a bubble, it's like, well, maybe we're in a weird sweet spot. That doesn't mean the economy is going to go up. It doesn't, we could see GDP decline by 0.3%, but like, a 0.3 decline is a hell of a lot better than a 10% decline like we saw during COVID or whatever the
Yeah,
decline
right.
was in 2008. So, I don't really know. 2 years is a long time. There's a lot of people running agencies that, maybe their bark is louder than their bite, and they're not going to do anything to the agencies. We saw with Doge that different organizations were telling that's a weird thing. It's like if your dream job is to be like the Department of Commerce or whatever secretary, and then like Doge is going to tell you you're going to fire all these people, and it's like, do you really want someone telling you on your turf in your organization that you've been looking forward to running, like, oh, you were just going to indiscriminately fire people? And it's
Yeah,
like there is
right.
some pushback. So on the other side, that's a good thing about our political system is that there is pushback, and whether it's in the press or not doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Like we always hear about, oh, Congress members in private are saying this, and it's like, well, maybe the message is getting across. We do know the tariffs on China went from 140% or whatever it was to like 28. So we're creeping back down to the realm of normal.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And
I'm
honestly,
just
like, is
struck.
a 10% tariff that bad? Like a 10% tariff on China that bad? Like, I wouldn't recommend doing it against Canada or Australia or New Zealand. That's personal opinion, my soapbox. Like, there are
Right.
national security reasons why we would tariff China higher than our other countries. There's reasons why we would, put pressure on them if they're going to do something.
Yeah.
Why don't we tariff?
Although the
I always thought that about the intellectual property. Like 20 years ago, when they just started stealing all of our stuff, just say, hey, China, we're going to put a 1% tariff every time there's a major hack of the DoD or federal government systems. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
there's a lot of stuff we just let happen in the last 20 years. And, that is kind of the support base that Trump has. People who saw that and are mad about it, whether they understand it fully is another thing. Same thing for Democrats, like the extent to which the base understands some of these issues, like who knows? But, I don't know. That's another long-winded
Yeah.
answer.
I'm just always struck by how like nonsensical like everything Trump does, like his approach to tariffs has just been so stupid, right? Like he's the pro business guy, but he's just going to say like in a month from now, I'm unleashing the tariffs. It'll be, what did he call it? Not Salvation Day, Liberation Day, but like no preparation, right? And he just launches all of these tariffs. Like wouldn't the pro business thing be to be like, all right, in 6 months, here's the tariffs we're doing. You have 6 months to prepare so the economy will not suffer as much as possible, right? Like every company will be able to plan this in into the next like 2 quarters worth of extrapolations of profits and projections of, what they're going to import and export. But instead, he just
Can I
does it
share a
like,
funny story really quick? Sorry
yeah,
to
go for
interrupt.
it.
Yeah. So I don't know if I think we've talked about this story before, but like, so uh, when you read the like biography of George H.W. Bush, there's like a funny story in the election of 1988 when they're at the Republican National Convention going to pick the Republican vice president pick or nominee, and apparently like the Bush people joke that like Donald Trump randomly called George H.W. Bush's people and was like, "I will be your
Yeah.
vice president," and so like, well, that's a funny story. But anyway, so there was another point where they were doing some kind of like arms deal, and I think this might have been before that during the Reagan administration. And apparently, like someone who was going to go like chair whatever agreement negotiation we were going to have with the Soviet Union at the time, he said that like he got a phone
Trump said or
call.
this other guy? Oh, the
Yeah,
official?
yeah. So this guy was going to run the summit, whatever, negotiations for arms reductions or whatever with the Soviet Union. Trump apparently called him or met him at a conference and said, "Here's what you got to do. Here's what you got to do to negotiate with the Soviet Union. You got to walk up to them in the first day, look them in the eye, and say." Fuck you. And then you walk out of the room and then you see what they do. And that was like his free advice. So it's like it's such a funny story because it's like, well, okay,
That's exactly what he always does.
that's just Donald Trump. So how is that, 30 years later, how is that different than him saying we're gonna increase tariffs to 138% and then fucking walk out the door? And it's like, would that be what I do? No. Would that be what a lot of other people in the American government or, the Commerce Department working out these trade deals or whatever? No. But like that's just how he
Right.
is. So I just love that
But
story.
it's,
It's so funny.
yeah. No, yeah, it's very illuminating. But another funny thing too is like I think we're in like day 43 or something of like one of Trump's like top economic advisors projecting that we would have 90 trade deals in 90 days because everyone's just going to be rushing to come to the table with Donald Trump and make some deal. And like all we have instead is like an agreement with like Britain that like is not even really an agreement, but it's like a handshake to have future negotiations according to like a couple little bullet points that they highlighted. I would say the 90 days, 90 trade deals in 90 days has not worked out well.
Well, I mean, that's just
And
like politicking, right? Like people don't
right.
realize that a trade deal. I was listening to this interesting podcast. They were talking. It's like the Trade Guys by CSIS, and they were just talking about how trade deals normally the longest part of a trade deal is not negotiating with another country. It's actually negotiating with different parts of our own trade ambassadors and all the lobbyists and stuff. So it's
Right.
like the idea that
And
you like
figuring
you're
out
gonna.
what we want and need
Oh
to
yeah, yeah.
specialize on. Yeah.
Well, and they get so technical, right? Like, so even things like
Yeah.
tariffs, not
It,
tariffs,
yeah.
sorry, like different trade barriers, like quotas, for example. Like, you'll have like these trade negotiators on our side going for like hours and hours or days or weeks negotiating, like, oh, this country gets 58% instead of 48% on lima beans. And like, that's just a extreme
Yeah.
example, but
Right.
that's literally how these things are done. And then you get all of that over weeks, and then you present it to another country who that's when they started, and then they have to get it through their political leadership, their parliamentary system, or whatever it is. So yeah, 90 trade deals in 90 days was just a political advertising ploy, I guess.
Yeah, and
It's
it's like a beautiful thing because like Donald Trump does not have the attention span to do all these trade deals, right? Like if the whole reason to do this is that Trump himself is the good negotiator and just get him in a room and he'll get people to agree to anything, which has never really been true, but like kind of a preposterous idea. Like Donald Trump literally does not have the attention span to do any of these trade deals, right? He's going to
well,
sit
would any
like,
president?
well,
Let's be real. Like,
yeah, well,
does
that's
Obama
exactly
want to
it.
sit in
Yeah,
a
right.
hotel,
Yeah.
convention center negotiating lima bean,
Right. But it's the kind
trade
of
there?
sociopathic confidence of Donald Trump for him to just act like he can do it's the I alone can fix it. I alone can do this. Every president before me is an idiot and has like we've been walked all over. It is just like a preposterous idea. And like clearly everything he's saying about tariffs and the trade deals and how easy they are, like again, it's like we already watched this movie in the first term. Um let's go ahead and move on to the budget. Another good deal
On that
that
note,
Trump is fucking up. Yeah. There's big cuts to Medicare. So it had like one successful vote out of like some panel or something or committee in the House, but now they're having trouble because the SALT deductions are not there, and then there's a lot of kind of moderate normie Republicans who don't like the cuts to Medicare, but even if they can pass something, right? Like the bill as we see it now has no chance in the Senate, right? The like senators are not going to agree to this plan. So then the senators will have to come up with their own bill. And this is something I think we talked about in a podcast a long time ago. But basically, I was reading this like right when Trump got elected, people were saying just like with um, the way Congress works and the way you have to do these like all like everything in one bills if you want to use the what's that? I'm drawing a blank on the name. What's that process?
reconciliation.
Reconciliation. Right, right. You only get one a year. And so we're kind of like, it's already May, right? And so I imagine the House has at least several weeks left to go to figure out their own bill. The Senate is going to have to take months to figure out their bill that's going to be totally different. And then there will be all these negotiations on it when, if both chambers pass it, they have to kind of, smash them together and come up with a new thing that then they both vote on. So like, it is quite possible that this process could take like all of the summer. I think there's some deadlines in September with the budget and some like must pass, like constitutionally mandated things that they have to pass. That's kind of like built in with this big, beautiful bill, the BBB, as it's being affectionately called now in the media. But I mean, there's a strong possibility that we could get to the early fall and Republicans have just squandered an entire year, right? Like some of these divisions are just like there's no way you can pass Trump's agenda and do the tax cuts and cut the debt. Like it's literally just impossible. You can do two of those, and almost certainly what they're going to do is just they're going to like do some crazy math, get whatever the parliamentarian is on the rules to like fudge the math, and they're basically just going to screw the deficit more, add to the debt, right? Like that's probably the only thing that they can do, and then just ram it down, like on a purely partisan vote. But
Well,
yeah,
part of it
what do
is
you
like
think?
you have
What's
to.
your idea of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's inevitable that they're going to add to the debt, right? You're spending 1.5 trillion extra a year. That's a lot of rent seeking and people getting benefits. So like if you're spending 1.5 trillion more a year on any number of pet projects, including Medicare, which is probably a lot of it, I mean, the reality is like anything you want to do, it's going to piss off people who are currently getting money because if you cut like a, I don't know, what is that, 12%, 15% of the federal budget, like you're going to piss off a lot of people. And if your political goal is to not piss off a lot of people who may vote you out of office in 2 years, like I don't, yeah, that's a hard thread to needle, right?
Do you think Republicans should just start governing as if they're going to lose the like their full government in 2026, right? Like, do you think they're just going to? Some of them have even referenced that, like they only have 2 years to get this done. If you look at the history, we keep having presidents that kind of get a full government and then lose one house, lose the other house, lose the presidency, and then the other side gets the full government. You could argue that right now, when our politics are so partisan, maybe that's not the worst thing that keeps happening. That it's just like a constant pendulum push, and like each side gets 2 years to do a little bit around the edges, but it's just too divided to really do anything too like any major overhauls. But um, I don't know. I guess I'm just increasingly bullish that we're in like 2005, and then like 2006 rolled around, and it looked like Democrats were in the wilderness, but all of a sudden they won the House. They started investigating all the Iraq War stuff, the Katrina stuff, and then we get Obama in this big landslide. I think history may be rhyming right now. What do you think about
Yeah,
that?
maybe. I really don't know. I mean, 7 million people didn't come out to vote for Democrats for Kamala
Yeah,
Harris. Like they'll have to pick
that's
some
true.
some much better people to run, I
Right.
imagine, to get a lot of people who
Although
would have voted there.
Right. Although Democrats have been winning some of these special elections, like just I think today or yesterday, I saw a report that they won some like Trump plus 50 special election. And we actually have gotten to a point where Democrats now, if you look at the numbers, Democrats are the party that actually benefit from low turnout. And you see that in a lot of these special elections. Like prior to 2024, Democrats have been winning a lot of special elections. So I don't know.
Never good that you
But
win. You do better when people don't vote.
Well, yeah, I
uh,
mean, it's not ideal, but I guess it's, Trump just brings out so many like kind of uncommon voters, right? Where like he kind of benefits from this big swing of like relatively apathetic or maybe even like moderate voters who are just kind of really fed up with Democrats on like kind of some of the maybe pendulum extremism on some of these woke issues that moderate voters just don't care for. Um, how do you think about Mike Johnson? How would you rate him? Would you say he is being successful? Is he meeting the moment? Is he being cucked by the moment? Does he like who could replace him? Right? He doesn't seem that effective.
no
He doesn't
idea.
seem that smart. Like, but if he had to step down for some reason, would Republicans just not be able to elect another speaker? Would they have to bite the bullet and get somebody like Jim Jordan in? Like, what do you make of Mike Johnson?
I really don't have a strong opinion, honestly. All I can
Really?
say is he still has the job, and
Do you
I
think
mean,
the job is
I
the
mean,
job just
Congress.
impossible leading like a Republican Congress?
Yeah, probably. I mean, the reality is like Congress is the most important branch, arguably by the
Right.
Constitution. It's not like that way. I'm not like an idealist who thinks we should go back to that, but like the president is important, but Congress is an important role too. They don't pass any bills. That's just the reality. So you know whether or not you can get your own voters to vote for your stuff, like that's a measure of whether you're a good speaker or not. He doesn't seem very good on that measure. He's got people threatening to torpedo the president's agenda based on their ideological commitments. So, I don't know. They've put stuff on the floor before that didn't win. I think that's probably a bad metric for a Speaker of the House. Like you don't ever remember hearing Nancy Pelosi put stuff on the floor and then get like lose really
Be
bad. So
surprised by losing, right? Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, on a variety of metrics, whether or not Congress is cohesive, like, and is doing their job, that's a no. Is he able to get his voters to vote or members to vote on stuff the way he wants? No. So that's, I think there are a couple knocks against him.
Right. And then last subject here. What do you think about Biden getting cancer? Like, let's say he had not dropped out, he had ran, he had won. What would it say about like the Democratic Party and then Biden personally if like he got this kind of a worryingly late stage cancer like 5 months into his second term?
Yeah, that would be bad. I think when you get to that age, there's a lot you have to think about. I think didn't he already have some like cancer scares when he was vice president and stuff?
I think he had like some skin cancer or something that got taken
Yeah.
care of.
I mean, I'm not going to knock him for having cancer. Obviously, yeah, it would have been a very different situation if he had won. In an alternate reality, I guess you could measure whether or not they would have told people, like if he was president and he had cancer, how long would it take before
Right.
that came out. Um, yeah, I mean, it sucks for him and his family. He has lived quite the life, of long life. He's had a lot of tragedy, so it's sad that his time maybe, um, you know, it's his time to unfortunately face what we'll all face. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
What do you think about his legacy in terms of kind of, I guess you can look at it that he did kind of screw the Democratic Party, not give enough time for a primary. He wasn't necessarily that helpful to Kamala Harris.
I mean,
Do
there's
you
a
think
lot of
his,
American presidents who did not adequately think about what would happen after them or, take that into consideration. Like, there are a lot of presidents who set up a vice president who wasn't given an opportunity and then they don't win the election because people don't know anything about them or didn't think they do anything. Like one of the interesting things and interesting historical debates is like, Lincoln was one of our best presidents, but also picked someone to be vice president who he personally knew was not fit for the job. And then, he
yeah,
was
right.
shot. He didn't obviously count on being shot so early on to his second term, but the country as a whole is stuck with in that case, Andrew Johnson, who was probably a drunk and admitted I should have never been the
And a
president or whatnot.
racist?
But
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean,
Kind
like,
of
you have
screwed
presidents
over.
who want the spotlight on them and they have a vice president. The joke is that vice presidency is not worth a warm bottle of piss or whatever. It's like the famous
Yeah,
quote in American
right.
history. So,
Yeah.
the idea that, you know, the president should be, this word is kind of a weird word, but you should be grooming the vice president to do your job and maybe take up the job of president after you to be the party's nominee. And that was not done. So it did not help Democrats. It did not help Kamala Harris, obviously, and it didn't help the country. Like, if you
Yeah.
really care about the stuff you care about, the issues you're pushing for 4 years as president, and then you just fumble the balls, you hand it off to someone else. It's no bueno, to use that term again.
Yeah. What do you think about Kamala Harris running again? Do you think she should? She should run. Should she run for governor of California? Like she's put some feelers out. Do you have any strong feelings about Pete Buttigieg or Gavin Newsom, who seem right off the
I have
bat the
no
front runners?
I don't care if she runs for governor of California. She was a senator there, and do I think she should run again for president? No, I think normally, like once you've lost, you probably shouldn't run again. It's just my personal opinion. I think at that point, like even you won your party's nomination, but a majority of the American people, or at least the Electoral College, obviously didn't want you. So at what point is even though you won your party's nomination but lost the election by millions of votes, like is that just like your own vain, desire to be president over the American people? Like, to me, that's a subjective debate that I think that maybe people, I don't know, people who run multiple times for president, it's like, okay, at what point is that just you just want to keep your name in the news. You just want to be relevant, right? And, you're not really doing what's best for 340 million other people who live among you. So maybe that's
Yeah.
a
No,
strong
that's a good
opinion.
point.
Yeah.
Right, that's a good point. I think in contrast to that, like a lot of respect goes to people like Pete Buttigieg and Beto O'Rourke, who are really putting in like their off-year time and attention and energy into doing a lot of stuff. I like Pete Buttigieg a lot. I mean, there's no better communicator. I think like the Democratic Party should just be, yeah, I don't know exactly the process of this, but someone should be giving him just money to go on Fox News like every single day, right? And like do the Lord's work, what did John Stewart call it? Like mining on shit mountain, you
Yeah.
know? And then like Beto O'Rourke is like everywhere in Texas. I just listened to a couple podcast interviews with him and he's like signing up people. I mean, some Texans might find it very annoying because he's everywhere, but he's signing up voters. He's trying to convince people. He's getting them to go out. I've seen some like analytical studies that like Texas, like on paper, could be a blue state already, but there's just so much apathy and there's so many people who don't vote. But like, demographically, Texas should, in theory, be a lot more of a swing state than it is.
I think it's a white
Obviously,
whale.
yeah, well,
There's
maybe.
a lot
I
of
mean,
white whales in American politics, and I think
yeah,
that
but Beto's last election, like I think it was something like 7 or 9 Democratic House members got elected, like because Democrats in Texas were outperforming the rest of the country. Um, So it's like we've got a new DNC head or whatever that is doing a 50 states plan, and like no off years is his motto. So like I don't know. I never really hear Democrats like. I feel like Democrats and just political parties in general should be like try to be everywhere, right? Like why are they not like, even though it's an off year, why are they not at colleges everywhere like putting on parties? Why are they not doing like events and festivals everywhere? Like, right? I just was at like Stagecoach. Like, why not do something that yeah, I guess it's hard. I mean, you probably can't just be a political person and get into like a bunch of events, but I mean, why not make it a just 24/7 concern? Or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Maybe,
interesting. You ask 100 political operatives, and they'll have probably 33 different opinions. You know what I mean? It's
yeah,
complicated,
right.
right? Like they're probably, you know, the when the Republicans lost in 2012, they did that whole autopsy that took like a year and a half or something like that. So, Trump's only been president for a couple months. The election was in November, so what is that, 7 months ago? So, these things take time. I think, certain election losses are more inexplicable than others. Like, 2012 wasn't the wildest surprise upset. I think Republicans kind of believed too much in their own hype and their own kind of like bad ideas on what the country felt, and Obama kind of cruised to reelection. I think, 2024 was a little more surprising, especially on the left, right? It's not like, the election went the way people kind of expected or thought could happen, and they were just like wishful thinking, right? I think it was a little different than that. Democrat, having millions of voters who had just voted for the Democrat with Biden, and then having them not come out was a surprise. So I think it's probably going to take a little more time than normal for Democrats to figure out what to do next. Plus, I mean, Donald Trump is hugely popular, and his approval ratings are going down a little bit, but most presidents' approval ratings go down, and we live in a hyper political, partisan time. So, presidents don't enjoy the 60% plus approval ratings that they once got. That's probably long gone. So I don't know. It's a different. It's a wild political world out there, I guess. It's bucking a lot of trends that I
Yeah.
think people spending their entire careers trying to figure out and forecast have, all they can do is shrug their shoulders.
Yeah, that's true. Do you think
But
JD Vance is the front runner for Republicans next time around?
I don't
Will
know
Marco Rubio run?
if there is another
Yeah,
third
there is
term for
enough.
Trump, right?
Will Don Jr. run? What about Don Jr.? Any
He might
strong feelings
try.
about him trying to get into politics?
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, I probably don't think.
I would be intrigued.
I
Like,
think you're breaking
I
up a
would
little
be.
bit.
I was wrong about Hillary Clinton winning. I thought Donald Trump had no chance. So I don't want to encourage Don Jr. to run and then win, but I would like to think that Don Jr. would have no chance of winning.
Yeah.
I would like to
Well,
hope.
yeah. On that note, I got a hard out here soon, but
Yeah, no worries. Do you want to shout out anything that you're working on? You kind of just started a Substack. Do you
yeah,
want to
just
talk
started a
about that?
Substack. I'm gonna put some funny little thoughts. It's called Nitwit Politics because a lot of things going on in the world are pretty nitwitty right now. So
Good branding.
yeah,
Yeah, and I'm Dash McIntyre. My video was not working because my Wi-Fi was weird, so the photo shot out. I'm still figuring out these Substack live or yeah, Substack lives, but I think we're going to try to do this at least weekly. Me and Adrian here, so I think we're going to try to do Wednesdays, roughly around like 6 to 7 p.m. So if you're interested, try to tune in next week. Thanks for listening, everybody. I've got a lot of comedy going on always with the Halfway Post. So follow me on Threads, Twitter, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Substack, Medium.com, wherever you're at. And yeah, I just try to make you laugh and have a little sanity in terms of the absurd insanities that we have to deal with on a daily basis. But thanks for listening, everybody. We got 152 people, so that's pretty solid.
shout out.
Thanks for liking, thanks for following and reading, and have a good rest of your day. See you, everybody.